Based upon that assessment, they found that our evidence collection personnel could go on site to conduct their work. They found low levels of aircraft fuel. After they finished their assessment, we began mapping and gridding the crime scene. The gridding process is important to help facilitate an orderly and methodical approach to evidence collection. Basically, as we get further away from the crater, the grids will probably increase in size. The crater area, the grids will be very, very small. We are looking to recover human remains, the black box, or the voice data recorder, personal effects, and aircraft parts. Before the evidence collection team, which numbers approximately 80 personnel from various agencies, before they enter the scene, again, they'll be given a safety briefing inasmuch as there's still materials out there that could prove potentially hazardous. As you can expect, the search will be painstaking, will probably last, and again, this is an estimate, 3 to 5 weeks. I can't overstate how methodical and painstaking this process will be. The NTSB will be conducting a flyover sometime this afternoon in order to better assess the scope of the scene. Certainly, in light of their experience, they are able to compare the scene here to scenes of past to give us a better indication of what we might have here. One important point I want to make is that if anyone out there has information to provide, they can do so via the internet, and the website address is ifccfbi.gov. Should there be any interest in finding out about the attacks, individuals should feel free to contact 866-483-5137. If there is any information to provide to the FBI with respect to what had occurred, feel free to contact the FBI Pittsburgh office, 412-471-2000. I'd like to defer now to the Lieutenant Colonel and the Major. They'll discuss the efforts of the Pennsylvania State Police.
Robert Hickes, Hickes. And
we were listening to an update there from Pennsylvania, the latest on the information on United Airlines Flight 93 that crashed yesterday just southeast of Pittsburgh. We'll have more on that update in just a minute. First to Leon.
Yeah, we're going to get back to our Bob Franken, who's working the crash site where that plane hit at the Pentagon in Washington. Let's go there now. Bob?
Well, Leon, I'm outside, of course, overlooking the place where the plane collided, but CNN producer Chris Plant is inside. He reports that the Pentagon is being evacuated. Of course, they wanted to open it for business this morning, the parts that were considered safe. But Chris Plant says it's being evacuated because of the danger of a spreading fire. We reported a while ago that the fire had spread from over there to other parts of the building and, in fact, had reached the inner ring. So for the second day in a row, the Pentagon is being evacuated. To give you some idea of just how tense it is here, something happened about 10 minutes ago. About 10 minutes ago, a police loudspeaker went off in this area. Get out of the area, said this person on the loudspeaker. Incoming plane, get out of the area. Well, all of us, of course, the camera crews, all of them pointed their cameras skyward, everybody looking to see evidence of this. About 2 minutes later, the police voice came on again and said, never mind, it was a friendly. So they are being so very, very careful and sometimes tense, and sometimes, as a matter of fact, they overreact, but of course they're concern would be much greater if they underreacted. And we've also seen evidence just in the last few minutes of how intensely the FBI plans to live up to its promise to investigate. We saw just a couple of minutes ago FBI agents fan out in the little grassy area right in back of me, fan out looking for whatever tiny pieces of evidence they could find in the grass, trying to in fact live up to the promise that they've made that they're going to investigate this very thoroughly, and of course to make sure they did it in an area that cameras could see so the message could be delivered to the rest of the world. Leon?
Well, Bob, let me get back to you. You're saying that the Pentagon's being evacuated right now because it's concerned about spreading fire and causing more damage. What is the latest right now on the extent of the damage inside the building? And do you know how many people were actually back at work in the building today?
Well, no, but we had been told that it would at most only be about half of the workforce. What we have been hearing is that the fire has been spreading through the roofs. It has made it to the inner ring, and according to Chris Plant, that fact has caused them to decide that they want to, in fact, get people out of the building now because it is becoming unsafe.
All right. Bob, can we give us an idea right now of which side of the building you're on and which side is perhaps is the biggest, I guess, looking at the biggest threat right now from this fire? Any idea on that?
Well, right now the biggest threat continues to be the side where the airplane collided. You can see, of course, right over there where it crashed into the building yesterday morning. It crashed into the building, and there is a concern that there's going to be a collapse, particularly of that area. And as a result, the people who have been searching for some of the casualties have been very, very careful about going on. There's an ongoing debate about whether they need to just collapse that part of the building or whether they want to try and shore it up and make it safe. However, the other side of the building is where many of the top officials of the Pentagon are located, and the fire has continued to spread, sometimes through the roof, but it has gotten to the inner ring, and it has become a bit of a threat. The secretaries of the Army and the Navy, as a matter of fact, were moved from their offices on that side of the building and went down to the basement. The evacuation is just a precautionary measure, but the fire is not under control.
All right, understood. We'll let you get back to covering that. Bob Franken by the Pentagon in Washington. We'll check back with you later on. In the meantime, let's go over to Derek.
Yeah, we wanted to get to Bob very quickly to get that information on the air, and so I didn't give you a complete recap on what we learned from the FBI in that briefing from Pennsylvania. It was Wallace Miller of the FBI giving us the latest on the investigation into the crash of United Airlines Flight 93. That's the flight that yesterday crashed around 10 a.m. Eastern. It was going from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, California. 38 passengers, 2 pilots, and 5 flight attendants on board that flight. All of them lost their lives. Wallace Miller of the FBI telling us that it now is safe for evidence collection experts to go into that crash site and start picking up pieces of evidence that will include human remains, looking for the black box for more clues as to what happened on board that flight, also aircraft parts and personal items that hopefully at one point would be returned to family members. This, as Mr. Miller pointed out, is going to be a painstaking process, very slow and deliberate. It could take as long as 3 to 5 weeks for all of the evidence collection to take place. He also let us know that later this afternoon, the NTSB will be doing a flyover of the area to get a better idea of the total size of that crash site. Once again, that's the latest on the crash of United Airlines Flight 93 that crashed just about 26 hours ago. Paula, up to you in New York.
Darren, I don't know whether you mentioned this. You might very well have, but I was busy talking with the producer during the tail end of your reporting. Apparently, government sources are now telling CNN that senior administration officials actually informed members of Congress and said that they believe that plane you were just talking about was initially directed at another government target, possibly the White House, the Capitol, or Camp David. Perhaps if those black boxes you were talking about are ever retrieved, we will have a better understanding of why that plane went down in a rural area outside of Pittsburgh. The paramedics in New York City, who have been working around the clock now, have just held a news conference in New York, and we want to share a part of that with you right now to give you an idea of just exactly what they're up against and trying to get to those folks they think might even be alive under all of this rubble. Let's listen.
As was mentioned before, it's not so much an asbestos effect. The problem really has been the dust, the concrete and paper. When you look at the site, there's literally feet of dust. So that from that standpoint, there's been a lot of respiratory maladies. There's no toxic chemicals as best we can tell, and that's an advantage. But there have been a lot of respiratory problems such as wheezing and asthma-like symptoms.
All right, there you have a paramedic describing some of the conditions the paramedics are up against. He was just describing wheezing. I imagine we caught that mid-sentence that he was talking about the tremendous amount of smoke that is still billowing from what is left of the North Tower, South Tower of the World Trade Center, both of which collapsed within an hour and a half of the initial blasts of the hijacked planes crashing into them. The third tower going, actually, which is called Building Number 7, much later in the day. Let's come back to what city officials are confronting in terms of the injured and the potential dead. Hillary Lane has just finished listening to a news conference that St. Vincent's Hospital held. This is one of the hospitals closest to the World Trade Center area. What can you tell us, Hillary?
Well, Paula, I can update you again on the numbers, and that is going to tell you a lot. They are not very different from the last time we reported them. 369 patients passing through. That's just about 5 more from the last time we reported. 4 deaths reported here, 1 at an affiliated hospital. That says a lot. According to one doctor here, and I'm going to quote him, by not seeing a lot of patients, they fear that there are not a lot of survivors. So the process down at the site moving very slowly, meticulously, gently. We had been reporting earlier they had pulled some people out of the wreckage. The hospital here had gotten a phone call at 7:45 a.m. telling them to expect some of those people, but they have not received any more phone calls alerting them of any more survivors who may have been pulled out of the wreckage this morning. They have brought in quite a number of firefighters and rescue workers who were involved in the rescue effort, and some of their injuries are incredibly telling. They have abrasions on their fingers from literally digging with their fingers, trying to move rubble, trying to help people who may still be alive, and that really says a lot for the rescue effort that's going on. But what also says a lot is behind me, empty stretchers, empty wheelchairs, and dozens of hospital personnel here on standby and waiting to do what they're needed to do if they should be called into action. Paula?
Hillary, you just mentioned the folks on standby, and I think that Mayor Giuliani wanted the message heard loud and clear that New Yorkers will not be paralyzed by what has happened to this city. He said there have been thousands and thousands of people who volunteered to help the paramedics, who volunteered to do whatever they can in the cleanup process. We know people in record numbers are offering to donate blood. And I understand, Hillary, at a bunch of hospitals around the city, you have doctors traveling from out of town to volunteer their services at emergency rooms. Have you seen that there at St. Vincent's? I think you mentioned a part of that about a minute ago.
Absolutely. I spent the day at Bellevue Hospital yesterday, and from early in the morning, there were people coming in off the street. There were 2 nurses from Texas here in New York City on vacation, heard about this, rushed in as quickly as they could to offer their services. Dozens of volunteers, and I tell you, the line to donate blood stretched out the door. They were moving people in groups of 50 to get them processed, to get the blood in and to be ready. So an incredible, incredible volunteer effort, professionals and civilians as well.
At Morse. All right, Hillary, thanks so much for that update. If I'm understanding this clearly, someone's just giving me some messages from the New York Medical Examiner saying they are perfectly, the system at least, this sounds very hard and cold, but this is a fact of dealing with this tragedy, that they can handle more bodies. There were some reports, and in fact, we reported some of the Associated Press reports this morning that barges had actually taken some of the dead from New York into New Jersey. That is not the case. However, it is true that some New York City cab companies have removed seats from their vans to help in the transport of victims across the river to New Jersey, where some of the city hospitals there can accommodate some of the wounded. And I think it'll be clearer in the days to come exactly what transpired last night. I think one of the biggest frustrations of all of the workers who've been involved in this rescue process is that they weren't able to even get into that perimeter area surrounding the World Trade Center until the wee hours of the morning because of the fear of structures continue to fall on them, and the amount of smoke billowing out from the area, and other safety concerns. So there you have it, Darren, the very latest from New York now. And as you've seen, or actually Leon, a tremendous outpouring of support for these firefighters and police workers who have to do the Lord's work right now.
Yeah, definitely, Paul. We've seen much of the same sort of reaction in the other focal point for this story as well in Washington, D.C. Many people there coming together, rallying to the cause, if you will. Now, the